Good evening and welcome back to the Riverdale Minyan Parent Parsha series, Parashat Vayigash. We are in the home stretch of Sefer Breshit, very exciting, and we're going to just jump right into it. We are really coming to not only the culmination of Sefer Breshit, but also the culmination in the story, in the dramatic story that we've been following with Yosef and his brothers and his father, and he's finally about to reveal himself to the brothers as being alive. And there is much ink that has been spilled in the best way possible over what this means for the brothers, their level of anxiety, what they fear, what this means for Yosef. And I just want to focus on one small thing. There's so many things to talk about. The story of our Avot and the story of particular of Yaakov and his children and the story of Yosef and how it unfolds. There are so many opportunities to think about and talk about parents, children, relationships, the beginning of a story, how it looks like, what it looks like again in the middle of a story, and what it looks like at the end of a story, how people repair relationships. There is so much here, but I just want to pick up on one small, very, very, very small detail. And I guess I'm thinking about it particularly in light of the situation that we find ourselves in vis-a-vis COVID, and also thinking about the ways in which we've been thinking about the different modalities and ways in which we think about engaging our children. And I think that that is something that is so critical. We've been talking a lot about knowing ourselves as people, knowing ourselves as parents, knowing ourselves in our relationships with our adult siblings or our adult parents, but also thinking about ourselves vis-a-vis who our children are, and looking at our children, asking ourselves, who are they? Who are they in their place in the family? Who are they as a part of the family unit, but who are they as individuals? And trying to be thoughtful about our parenting techniques. And I also think about it in terms of what we're doing on this platform, right? We're thinking about different ways in which we can engage different children, depending on their strength, depending on who they are, depending on what they need. And I was thinking about it also just in light of the platform that Torah and Judaism gives us for so many different things, right? We think about the ways in which people learn. So we know that there are auditory learners and there are visual learners. And some people do well when they make mnemonics for themselves, and some people do really well when they're learning something and they're able to take notes on it. Everyone learns in so many different ways. And I'm thinking about the fact that one of the beautiful things, one of the many beautiful things about Torah is the fact that it's all there for us from the beginning to really be able to think about the fact that Hashem knew and Chazal knew that people learn in so many different ways, and that everybody should have Torah accessible to them, and that there are so many different ways to come at it. And I think one way in which we see that in this week's Parsha is the way in which Yosef communicates to his father that he is still alive, right? There is this idea, there's a duality that goes on in terms of how are we going to tell our father that Yosef, who he thought had been dead all this time, is actually alive. And now on the one hand, right, like I was thinking about from this perspective that we know that back in much earlier when the brothers tell Yaakov that Yosef died, he says that he will not be comforted, right? So wouldn't this be the best news possible that they could run back to tell him? And similarly by Yosef himself, right? Yosef, there's so many different narratives of trying to understand that what Yosef was thinking that Yaakov knew about what had happened to him, and that there is a school of thinking that Yosef very much thought that his father was involved in this horrible event that had happened to him, that his father must have known and somehow given permission. And so in this revelation that of what happens, right, when the brothers tell this whole story and Yosef has this breakdown moment, that in fact this relationship that he had with his father was actually deep and meaningful and real, and his father didn't know what the brothers had done, and he had thought that he was dead all along, right? So you would think that even Yosef would want to kind of run back and kind of reveal himself to his father. And the way in which he does it, I think, is so interesting, at least according to Chazal, right? We know V'yidaber elav kol divrei Yosef asher diber alehem vayaret ha'agalot asher shalach Yosef, right? We know that originally it's Paro's suggestion to send these agalot, to send these wagons, but when the brothers retell this of all these things to their father Yaakov, the agalot specifically get a lot of attention, and they seem to be something that was inspired by Yosef. And Yaakov's soul was revived by this. So the Chazal ask, and again, so much has been written about this, but Rashi, most of the other Mefarshim quote Rashi, so we just went right to that source, to Rashi. Siman masar lahem b'mahaya osek paresh mimanu b'parshat agala arufa. That these wagons were supposed to be almost like a play on what they had last been learning together as parents and child about the story of an egla arufa, the body that was found outside a city, and it's a play on words. And when Yaakov saw this, it says that his spirit was kind of revived. And different Parshanim talk about the fact that maybe his spirit was revived because he knew, in fact, that they were not telling a lie, that indeed this was what they had last been learning, and it was Yosef who had sent this, and that Yosef was there. But I think also this idea that Yosef never forgot the Torah learning and never forgot this relationship with him. And one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of the parenting piece was the fact that what we're seeing in this small snippet is that the ability, yes, we send our children to school, and teachers, Baruch Hashem, do most of the teaching for our children, and they do it in such an amazing and wonderful way. And there is much about that Chazal talk about the role of a teacher vis-a-vis a pseudo-parent in terms of their ability to communicate and to teach and to inspire. And I think it's so critical. But I also think that there's something so important that this pasuk is teaching us that is relevant for us, particularly in the era of COVID, when sometimes our kids are learning in school and sometimes our kids are learning at home, but also thinking about all the different ways that we have an opportunity to teach them and help them learn, not just about specific things. Yes, about specific things, like we can learn Torah with them, we can learn all sorts of things with them in the text, but also that through our actions, through our being, through the things that we share, right? Where they wouldn't necessarily learn that in school, that our homes are ultimately the source of all of the teaching and learning that we can provide for our children. And we should never forget that. And I think we see this as an impact that Yosef might have had a teacher. He might have had a rabbi. He might have had a Mora or a Rabbanit who was teaching him, but ultimately the relationship and the Torah that he most remembered was the thing that he had learned with his parents. In this case, it was his father. His mother was not alive, but I think that it's equally appropriate to say that it's the lessons that we as parents can share with our children that are most critical to their development, that last with them, that stay with them. And I think that that's what we're seeing in this week's Parsha as a reminder in our own parenting, where we're tired, we're busy, but really reining ourselves in and thinking about every opportunity to the best of our ability, because let's be real, not every opportunity can possibly be a learning opportunity, but when we, because it's just not humanly possible, but that when something does come through our mind, that we can pause and say, here's something that I did, or I learned about it, or let me teach you something, looking at other opportunities, or just the way we share, the way we behave, as real learning opportunities that really have such a lasting impact on our kids. Something from a different part of my life is that we know when it relates to kids with eating disorders, that regardless of what parents say, that their actions and what children perceive their parents to be thinking has a much more lasting impact on how kids internalize messages around body and food. And so I think it goes to the heart of the matter. In fact, one of the things that's interesting, just going back earlier in the Yaakov story, Rav Rosner pointed out a few weeks ago that when Yaakov says to the brothers after the first dream, don't worry about it, it's not really true, they didn't believe him. They should have been calmed down, but they didn't believe him because in reality, they knew that in Yaakov's heart of heart, he actually wasn't so sure what he was saying was correct. And our children know that, they see that, and they have a sense of when we're actually speaking and we believe it, or when we're speaking and we're like, we're saying it, but we're not 100% sure about it. And I think there's one other piece, because I think that everybody learns differently, children learn differently, we all learn differently, we all have different strengths. But I think I just wanted to pull up the Sefer HaYashar, which is seems to be the first Parshan that alludes to this kind of famous story, that they didn't just tell Yosef, Yaakov, they were worried that if they just came out of the gate and were like, good news, Yosef's alive, he'd be like, are you kidding me? And have a total heart attack. And so they kind of devised this whole plan that they're going to bring in Asher's daughter, whose name is, I'm forgetting this minute, I'm going to look, Sarah, I think is her name. Asher, yeah. But you know what I'm realizing is that I think this might have gotten flipped around when I cut and pasted it. So that's going to make it a challenge to read. But anyways, point of the matter, and that it was Asher's daughter, and she played the harp, and she told this very calming story. And so when the brothers came, you know, like he had already kind of like been given like a heads up, for lack of a better terminology. And I was thinking about this idea of music, and I was thinking about the idea of music and the idea of music in liturgy, in tefillah. I was thinking about it because this is for Shabbat. I was thinking about like zmirot, and I was thinking about the fact that like there are so many tables where like there are families where like zmirot are like a really big thing. Like my in-laws, like zmirot are like a really big thing. Like they're big zmirot family, and I came from a family where nobody sings zmirot. And sometimes we in our own home kind of go through waves of like, we sing a little bit more, we sing a little bit less. But I think that like it harkened me back to this idea from either last week or 2 weeks ago, that when we laugh, when we sing, when we do things that bring up our endorphins in a very wonderful way, I think that like it adds like a really positive energy to the table. What's interesting is that when I was looking a little bit into the history of Zmirot, like a lot of it had to do with like Pismonim, a lot of it had to do with like spiritual esoteric things about ways in which we can relate to Shabbat. Some of it had to do with practical things in terms of the ways in which the songs can actually help divide up some of the meals, because we're supposed to have 2 meals Shabbat day, and so enabling it to divide up those meals. Thinking about the fact that there are less prescribed night songs, having to do with the reality that like they could see less at night, and during the daytime you could sing for longer. But I definitely also, from a psychologist perspective, I think about the fact that like there are so many different ways to connect to people. And there was like a whole school of thought around like music therapy and art therapy. And I think that it really allows people to connect and tap into different things. And one of the things, at least I see oftentimes in my own home, is like, you'll have a moment where like a kid will roll their eyes like, oh, and another kid will be like, oh, that person's off key. Usually I'm the off key person. But I think that ultimately everybody kind of gets into it. And so I think that there's really something about like, whether it's just taking 10 minutes and trying to like incorporate a Sudah Shlishi type experience for families, or just pausing and singing a song at the table. It doesn't always have to be that. Not everybody is going to have lots to say at a Shabbat table. Not everybody wants to have a lot to say at a Shabbat table. And I think that like including a Zemer, and I think that like that to me also speaks to the fact that like there were different modalities that they used in communicating to Yaakov that his son was still alive. The idea of reminding him and sending him a message that was supposed to be a secret message just for him, that maybe was really able to like warm his heart. And then you have this idea of the kinor and music, and then they came and used their words. And I'm thinking about it just from all these different modalities, and thinking about the ways in which we can incorporate these modalities into our home, and incorporate them around our learning and our Torah and our hashkafa, like in terms of just like a sense of spirituality. And I think that it's something that we can all probably use a little bit of an extra dose of, and sometimes doesn't necessarily always come so comfortable to us, and so might be pushing us a little bit outside of our comfort zone. But I think that like it's a really, it has the potential to be a wonderful thing, and I think lower the pressure to some degree on us when we feel like we have to prepare for the Shabbat table. We have to have something interesting to say. What happens when it falls flat? And instead really being able to kind of have other modalities to connect to the Shabbat, to connect to the day, to connect to our children. Parenting moments and learning and singing, that was my parenting tip on the go. Okay, lots of fun things to do. For people who are home with their kids because they're on vacation, I did a few arts and crafts opportunities. I've you can't play the harps on Shabbat, but I think it could be a great opportunity to do that with your kids either Thursday or Friday. I also think like the vegetable trains were awesome. Like, so I just did different wagons. I think you could like totally play with them on your own. I like the idea of incorporating music in some capacity here, like on Shabbat. So like you could try to make a music note out of your challah. They did it out of like a pretzel dough. Maybe I'll try it and I'll post. I'll keep you posted. But I love the vegetables because you could do it on Shabbat. You could cut it up. You could give it as kids, an activity for kids. I love the pepper. I think it's adorable. It can be a centerpiece. So I think that's a total win. One year, I think this was for this week's Parsha. So I had a moment, I'm like, oh, I don't know. But I think I did the buggy wagons, which is actually like a stroller. But I think I actually did it for this week's Parsha because of the agalot. And I think everyone looked at me and was like, it's a little bit of a stretch. But I did it anyways. And we did the mask because Yosef takes off his mask and he reveals that Ani Yosef, I am Yosef. And so I think you can also play with lots of different carts and buggies. I might do some wheels, like, and just like kind of like, like dip some Oreos and like kind of do a wheel. I think there are lots of different things that you could play with this week's Parsha. And I'm excited to see what everybody creates. So Shabbat Shalom. Have an easy, meaningful fast for everybody who is fasting on Friday. And reminder, it is a fast day on Friday. And I look forward to seeing what you're posting. Shabbat Shalom.